Hi everyone, my name is Luis Felipe Gama and my partner's name is David Alexander Carreño, and we are going to talk about the book A Clockwork Orange, right by Anthony Burgess. We are going to start with a short summary followed by the analysis of the book.
A Clockwork Orange was written in 1862 by Anthony Burgess, who was an English writer and compositor who developed several novels such as The Vision of Battlements and The Devil of a State. He was best recognized for highlighting the loss of traditional values of a society inside an environment of drugs and consumerism. The book had an influence in musical, literary, and let's say that visual culture, and it had an adaptation by Andy Warhol in 1965, which made of it an underground hit.
This story began at the Coroa Milk Bar. Alex, the main character, is drinking milk with some drugs in company of his drugs, Pete, Georgie, and Dim. Under the effect of these drugs, they commit some crimes. All the time they were wearing strange clothes. They continue committing crimes until one night they decide to steal a car and go to the countryside. After that, they assault a house of a writer, and Alex destroyed his work called A Clockwork Orange. They beat the writer and rape his wife. Then they came back to a milk bar and drank more milk. A few minutes later, Alex and Dean argued because of a woman. The other drugs calmed the situation. Alex went to his home and later he listened classic music, Beethoven for being more specific. Anthony Burgess represents a totalitarian state in his work, showing elements of both Soviet and American capitalism. We can see clearly the influence of Russian culture in works like Korova, Milk Bar, as well as the Russian slang drugs. This work is difficult to understand because of the use of Natsat, the teenage slang that Alex and his drugs speak. The Natsal is a mixture of Russian, Cockney English, childish slang, and some Burgess terms. The use of Natsat common when Alex talk about violence. For example, the word blood becomes groovy, and the word becomes ultra violence. And also the Russian word karashu in Natsan translations means horror story. When Burgess describes Jot, we can see clearly that he holds no love for them. When he describes the outfits, it makes them look ridiculous. All the time he shows that those kids are extremely violent, but they are still children.
After fighting with Billy Boy the next day, Alex didn't want to go to school. On the contrary, he kept lying on his bed, dreaming with gathering his drugs once again. However, he wasn't able to run away from his doctor. From the beginning of his strange and violent behaviors, the government hired a doctor to look for him and follow his lead. After the talk with the doctor, Alex reads a side of a newspaper which specifically talks about bad acts of teenagers and how families and relatives are responsible of it. He is totally against the government and he feels free with violence, something that even himself can't explain. Finally, after dressing up and having his breakfast, he goes to the record shop to get a copy of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and 5 hours later he ends up having sex with two girls and listening music. In the fifth chapter, Alex and his drugs go back to the streets to stall people and conquer girls. They absolutely feel the necessity to do it and to go to the Korova Milk Bar to perceive reality from other point of view. Here, in this chapter, it's possible to shift our gaze in the measure of Russian and English cultures through the language, which is Natsat. One night, when Alex and his friends get in the house of a woman who was listening Beethoven sounds, Alex beat her and he got caught up by the police. Then his drugs ran away. Alex finally is sent to prison, and there he knew of an experiment called Ludovico's technique, in which prisoners were almost required to see different movies about murders, illnesses, and sadness, all together, with Beethoven's music. 3 years after being subjected to this experiment, Alex didn't want to commit violent acts because it made him feel sick and sad. On the contrary, he found peace under religion and Bible. After the experiment, Alex is shown to some government officials as the first product of the Ludovico's technique. Evidently, he was a different man. Then he goes to his parents' house and he realized that they didn't want to be with him anymore. He decided to go to the library to reflect about it. However, he faced a group of old men, which he had molested several years before, and they almost killed him. Suddenly, two police officers arrived and he recognizes one of his drugs. Then they took him to the countryside, and Alex, once again, receives a terrible beating. After getting a government health care, Alex is again a violent teenager. He goes back to the street and gathers another gang. However, this time something is wrong with him. He recognizes he's growing up and violence is not a priority in his life anymore.
Now I'm going to explain why dictatorship is evident in this story. Burgers show a strategy in postmodernism that consists in a little push from freedom, followed with a crackdown from the controlling party. We can see in the book when Alex controls of his drugs mirrors dictatorships. Alex wants to rule the group and does not care to have other opinions infused with his leadership. Another important fact is that we can see in the world of Alex that he always stays away from society and from a deeper sense of himself. There is never, at any time, a sense of being part of a greater whole. It is Alex's fragmented self that lands him his very own bed in jail and later on first class ticket to be experiment on where everything focused on him.
In the novel, there is a certain perspective about freedom and how Alex is subjected to change his own perspective about good things and bad things. Specifically, the experiment takes away Alex's capacity, or let's say that Alex's skill, to choose violence in order to feel fine. And let's say that whenever he thinks about violence, whenever he thinks about doing something bad, he feels sick and he recognizes that there are other ways to live without pain. It clearly represents a critic or a perspective about the government's methods in order to punish delinquents by a technique which is called the brainwashing, which was and is still a technique used to manage people's behaviors. In A Clockwork Orange, there are two different perspectives of the characters. The first group were the old people, and the other group were the teenagers, or in other words, the drugs. The point is that old people just keep talking about moral principles and technological advances, and on the other hand, teenagers, let's say that they just kept living in the present without looking to the past or without looking to their history. Those two perspectives represents clearly two movements. Let's say that they were like some kind of two movements or two times of humanity, which were the modernism and the postmodernism.
Okay, now we are going to talk about some important and interesting facts of this work. To understand a little bit more the intention of the book, it's important to know that the story is based on a real-life event suffered by Burger's wife. In 1844, when Burgers returned from Malaysia to London, his pregnant wife was raped by 4 Americans, and she lost her baby. That's the origin of the scene in which Alex and his drugs rape the writer's wife at the house of the countryside.
We have already seen how The Simpsons uses historical facts in order to represent sarcastic events of the current world. In one of those chapters, Bart uses the same clothes than Alex, and precisely because he's getting crazy to get some cupcakes. In 1876, the novel was removed from Colorado and Massachusetts because the students started to create some kind of nadsat in their daily conversations.
Now I'm going to explain why music is so important in the story. Burgers want to show that Alex had a soul, and we can see this clearly when Alex listens classical music. Uh, Here we can see that Alex enjoyed this wonderful work of Beethoven, and later we can see how Alex lose his soul when he can't enjoy the music again because of the Ludovicus experiment. So we can see that Burgess thought that like the worst punishment will be taking away of him his soul because he can't enjoy what what he liked before. So that's the way of see this punish for Burgess.
The da capo area is a symmetrical structure sound which was really used in the novel, and it allowed the reader to get in specific parts of the story, giving it a classical and dark dimension to the book.